Welcome back to the Deep Dive. You've brought us a fascinating and, frankly, a deeply unsettling stack of source material today.
I have.
It really operates less like a simple story and more like a detailed legal brief that's been, I don't know, layered over this really profound study of community psychology.
That's exactly the right way to put it. Our sources give us this forensic analysis of fear, of manipulation, and really the tragic mechanism by which a reputation can be weaponized.
Especially in a small, closed community.
Exactly. We are diving into the story of a man named Jack St. Bride, who survives one legal nightmare only to walk, directly into an echo of it.
In this town, Salem Falls, New Hampshire.
Right, Salem Falls.
So our mission today is to really analyze the anatomy of this second accusation. We need to unpack not just what happened, but how it happened. How did this collision of, a past trauma, community prejudice, and a group of calculating teenagers lead to this high-stakes legal battle where the truth almost seemed irrelevant?
Yeah, that's the goal. We're looking for those critical aha moments.
The moments about the evidence, about justice, and I suppose the nature of manufactured guilt.
And the essential starting point for this deep dive has to be Jack St. Bride himself. He shows up in Salem Falls in March of 2000.
Right.
And his arrival is instantly fraught. He's not just an outsider. He's legally mandated as a danger.
Absolutely. He's a former teacher, a coach, someone who dedicated his life to mentorship. But he arrives with the literal stamp of a criminal.
He's required to register with the local authorities.
With Detective Lieutenant Saxton specifically.
Yes, as a sexual offender.
Yeah.
And this registration, it's the narrative's central engine. It turns Jack into this prepackaged villain before he's even unpacked his bags.
It creates an immediate environment of just intense suspicion.
Totally. Jack's status means that every single future interaction, every glance, every misstep, it's all going to be filtered through the lens of that official label. He knows he can't go back to Loyal, which was the site of his original downfall.
And he's carrying this internal residue of being locked up.
Yes. There's this small, just heartbreaking detail in the source material that says so much about his state of mind when he arrives.
What's that?
He stands outside the taxi, just waiting for the driver to unlock the door for him. It's a habit, ingrained from his time being locked inside. This isn't just a man looking for a fresh start. This is a man whose whole concept of basic freedom has been permanently altered by the system.
And that psychological scar is so crucial, isn't it? Because we really can't understand the drama in Salem Falls without first understanding the trauma of what happened in Loyal, New Hampshire.
We have to. It's part one, the weight of the past. Specifically, that allegation from July 1999 that forced him into this corner in the first place.
The initial charge was felonious sexual assault.
Yeah.
Statutory rape.
Right. He was a coach at a place called Weston Brook Academy, and the accuser was Catherine Marsh, the underage daughter of the local Reverend Elidor Marsh.
Okay, so the context here is vital.
It is. Catherine developed this pretty intense crush on Jack. It happened after he showed her some compassion and attention following a soccer injury.
So he was just being a good coach?
He was being a good coach, but from that, this infatuation grows. And the prosecutor, a woman named Loretta Winwood, builds her case not just on Catherine's word, but on this piece of, just damning physical evidence that Jack couldn't refute.
Okay, so this is the smoking gun detail that really sealed his fate the first time around.
It is. It was Catherine Marsh's red satin bra, a standard boarding school item, and it had her name sewn right into the inseam.
And they found this where?
In Jack's briefcase.
Oof. That's tough to explain away.
It's impossible to explain away. Jack's story, which he maintained the entire time, was that he found it on the soccer field.
Okay.
He says he realized instantly how bad it would look, what the implication was of possessing it, and he just stuffed it into his pocket. He was planning to deal with it later, maybe just throw it away, but he was too late.
And that physical evidence, regardless of his intent, that makes the prosecutor's case incredibly strong.
Exceptionally strong. It's something a jury can see and touch. It's very, very hard to dismiss.
But then the narrative introduces this critical counterpoint. Catherine eventually retracts her statement. She says the relationship never happened.
Right.
And you'd think, okay, case closed. It falls apart.
You would think that. But the system had a very different and, frankly, a very cynical interpretation.
Which was?
The prosecutor, Loretta Winwood, she looks at this retraction through a lens that's been shaped by years of statutory rape cases.
So she's seen this before.
She thinks she's seen this before. She sees Catherine's change of heart not as proof of Jack's innocence, but as inevitable emotional manipulation.
The kind that's common in these situations.
Exactly. The quote from the source is chilling. She believed Catherine changed her mind to save him.
Wow.
She believed that once the object of their affection is carted off in cuffs, they suddenly wonder if that was such a good idea.
That feels like a massive failure of the justice system, doesn't it? To just immediately dismiss a retraction, to assume the victim is just naive or emotionally compromised, no matter what the facts might be.
It completely negates the possibility that she was just telling the truth a second time, or that she made a mistake.
So this forces his defense attorney, a guy named Milton Sprigg, into an impossible corner.
He's in a terrible position. He tells Jack, look, going to trial is Russian roulette. With that physical evidence, with the bra and the prosecutor's very strong bias, Jack was looking at a 7-year Class B felony conviction.
7 years in a state penitentiary.
A long, long time.
So Jack is faced with this brutal compromise. Fight for his absolute innocence and risk 7 years, or sacrifice his innocence for a misdemeanor.
And he takes the plea bargain. He admits guilt to a misdemeanor simple sexual assault. He ends up serving 8 months.
But the terms were legally devastating.
Devastating. He had to stand in court and admit, quote, that you knowingly had sexual contact with Catherine Marsh for the purpose of sexual arousal or gratification.
So even though he maintains his innocence privately, legally, he is a convict. That label is stamped on his soul forever.
And his lawyer's advice, you finish your sentence and then you go on with your life. I mean, that turns out to be just deeply, deeply misguided advice, considering the lasting damage that legal admission would cause.
And what's fascinating is how he actually survived that sentence. The sources go into some detail about his life in this minimum security pod. He was targeted immediately.
Of course. He was a teacher, an easy target. Specifically, he drew the attention of an inmate named Mountain Felcher.
Big, aggressive guy.
Huge, aggressive inmate who tried repeatedly to sexually assault him. Jack had to rely on just quick thinking. He lies at one point about a confrontation with a cow in the farm mixing room just to avoid a beating. A lie the nurse saw right through, but, she accepted it out of pragmatism.
But then he finds this truly unexpected and, I think, ingenious survival mechanism. He turns his intellectual prowess into a shield.
He used his encyclopedic knowledge of trivia? Yes, Jeopardy! It aired every night at 7 p.m. So Jack fabricates this high-stakes betting ring. He promises all the other inmates, including Mountain, a can of coffee if he ever failed to get every single answer right.
And this actually works.
It works brilliantly. Soon, the guards, other pods, they're all wagering on him. He becomes financially valuable to the other inmates. And this whole manufactured distraction, it keeps Mountain, his main aggressor, off his back.
So think about that for a second. His knowledge of, Renaissance history and world geography literally saved him from physical and sexual violence.
It's a remarkable demonstration of resilience. But even in moments of direct confrontation, he maintained this fierce internal defiance.
Right. There's that one moment when Mountain finally does catch him alone.
Yes, after Jack loses a bet. And instead of fighting or pleading, Jack just accepts the physical restraint, but refuses to break mental.
What does he do?
He just stares at Mountain and calls him pathetic. He denies the aggressor the psychological win. It showed that his self-worth was still totally intact, despite everything the system was doing to try and crush it.
And that defiance, that deep-seated refusal to accept the label they put on him, that's what defines his conduct when he gets to Salem Falls.
Absolutely. It's why, in the new jail in Salem Falls, he refuses to wear the standard orange uniform.
Because for Jack, wearing the uniform is an acceptance of that criminal status. It's not just a man in custody. It's an admission.
Exactly. And that small act of refusal leads to multiple stints in solitary confinement, including one just brutal 6-day stretch where they turned off the shower water. He's willing to endure pretty serious physical hardship to protect his psychological integrity.
Okay, so let's fast forward now to the news setting. Salem Falls, March and April of 2000. This brings us to part 2. Suspicion and the occult backdrop.
Jack gets a job as a dishwasher at a place called the Door Diner, and that's where he meets the owner, Addie Peabody.
And Addie is a person forged by her own massive traumas.
She really is. She's grieving the death of her young daughter, Chloe. But she also carries these deep physical and psychological scars from surviving a past gang rape.
A rape committed by high school athletes under the bleachers.
Yes. And one of those athletes was Charlie Saxton.
The same Charlie Saxton who is now the detective lieutenant handling Jack's registration.
The very same.
Wow. That convergence is just, it's crucial. The man tasked with policing potential sexual violence is himself a past, unpunished aggressor against the woman who is now employing the registered sex offender.
The community tension is thick enough to cut with a knife. It is absolute tinder just waiting for a spark.
And Detective Saxon knows this. He knows how volatile the community is.
He does. He actually delays distributing the official memo about Jack's registration because he's afraid of the inevitable public outcry. But the local power structure, it's already mobilizing against Jack.
And we see that immediate, aggressive pursuit from the town selectman, Wes Quartermanch.
Wes is driven by two things: his own ambition and his relentless, unrequited pursuit of Addie.
So he sees Jack as a convenient obstacle.
A convenient obstacle and an easy scapegoat. Wes aggressively campaigns to drive Jack out of town, reflecting this generalized fear. He believes that, quote, as soon as word got out, there would be hell to pay.
And the harassment starts small, right? Some graffiti on Roy Peabody's door.
Yep, but the message is crystal clear. Jack is not welcome here. And Charlie Saxton, the conflicted police officer, he essentially condones this kind of low-level vigilantism.
Oh, so?
He confronts Jack, and he gives him this deeply ambiguous warning. He says Jack has the legal right to stay in Salem Falls, but the town also has the right to try to change your mind.
So he's basically sanctioning the harassment.
He's passively sanctioning it.
Right.
It legitimizes this idea that Jack is guilty by reputation no matter what he actually does now.
And that fear is exactly what the accusers were counting on. Now, at the same time, we're introduced to this Wiccan circle.
We are. Gillian Duncan, she's Amos Duncan's daughter, and her friends Meg, Chelsea, and Whitney, they practice what they call the craft. They believe they possess actual power.
And the sources establish that these girls aren't just, role-playing teenagers. They genuinely believe in their abilities.
They do, and the narrative gives them this moment of validation that just shifts their entire dynamic.
You're talking about the healing spell. It's such a surprising fact, and it undercuts any easy dismissal of their beliefs.
It really does. There's an elderly diner patron, Stuart Hollings. He has a devastating stroke, significant brain damage, effectively mute, and the girls cast a healing spell on him.
What'd they do?
They focused on their visualization, and the source notes that the flame of the candle they used rose dramatically. But what happens next is what truly defines the shift. Stuart Hollings, against all neurological odds, miraculously wakes up asking for breakfast.
Wow, that must have felt incredibly powerful.
It's a pivotal and frankly frightening turning point, especially for Gillian.
Because it validates their power, but it also introduces hubris.
Yes. Gillian becomes immediately fascinated with the dark side of magic. She starts questioning the fundamental moral framework of the Wiccan Rede.
And it harm none, do what you will.
That's the one. She questions the limits of their power. She doesn't just question it, she actively suggests using it for malicious or, self-serving intent.
Right, she challenges the group. What if they cast spells on others?
Yes. The source notes her confidence is just staggering for a 17-year-old. Her comment is chilling. A true witch can cast spells on someone else.
And that's the key piece of context we need, right? Gillian is going into the events of April 30th, not as some naive teenager, but as someone who believes she has the power to manipulate reality and use fear and magic to get what she wants.
That deep-seated malicious intent is crucial context for the main event, the second allegation. Which brings us to part 3, the night of April 30th, the night of the Beltane Pagan Festival.
And the manipulation starts days earlier.
It does. Gillian intentionally engages Jack at the diner. She accidentally spills some sugar, then she opens more packets and deliberately performs this provocative act.
She coats her finger in sugar and sucks it off while staring right at him.
Exactly. This is not some accidental flirtation. It's a calculated boundary test. It's her, maybe setting the conditions for her intended spell, or maybe just baiting the man she intends to accuse.
So now we get to the critical issue of the timeline, the night of the alleged assault. Let's track Jack's movements first, because his lack of memory for those key hours becomes a huge problem for his defense.
A massive problem. Jack was drinking heavily with Roy Peabody at the Rooster Bar. Roy confirms they were together until about 11:30 p.m., which is when Roy passed out.
Oh, bar closed at midnight.
Right. Jack doesn't resurface until 1:30 a.m. when Addie sees him back at the diner. So that's a 90-minute period. Midnight to 1:30 a.m. That's the missing time the prosecution will exploit ruthlessly.
And it was during this missing time that he was violently beaten, which tragically provided the physical evidence that would be used against him.
Exactly. As Jack steps outside the bar, he's grabbed from behind, brutally attacked by men in ski masks.
He gets deep cuts, bruises.
To his ribs, his belly, his face. A serious blow that causes blood to run down his throat. We later find out this vigilante attack was carried out by Amos Duncan Gillian's father and 2 other angry fathers from town.
So he wasn't just randomly assaulted. He was being punished by the community. And his only survival mechanism was just sheer intoxicated flight.
Drunk, terrified, and injured, Jack runs blindly through the dark, wooded area near the river to escape. The source material details him stumbling over a root, scraping his palm badly, and getting whipped across the face by a low-hanging branch.
And that causes a new cut on his cheek.
A new, visible, straight, thin cut. He was utterly disoriented by the time he finally collapsed, exhausted and bleeding, and stumbled back toward town.
So while all that is happening to Jack, what are Gillian and her friends doing in those same woods?
They're celebrating Beltane. It's a pretty significant pagan festival. It celebrates fertility, the union of the god and goddess. They had a bonfire. They tied colored ribbons to a pine tree.
And Gillian was dressed provocatively.
She was. She even performed a suggested ritual with the silver ribbon. The atmosphere was, ceremonial, emotional, and very deliberately charged.
Okay, so now, what is Gillian's story of the assault? The story she tells the police that leads to Jack's immediate arrest.
Gillian claims that after the ceremony, she went back alone to the clearing to check on the dying fire. She says Jack, who she claims was hiding or stalking her, grabbed her from behind, pushed her to the ground, and raped her.
And what's the crucial detail? The one that seems to provide physical validation for her story.
She claims she scratched his cheek while fighting him off.
The same cheek that had just been cut by a tree branch.
The very same. So Charlie Saxon arrives, he photographs the single long scratch, and Jack is arrested. The source describes Jack moving through the booking room routine easily, as if it were a complicated dance to which he had long ago learned the steps.
That trauma from the first incarceration has prepared him for the second.
And this is where Jack meets his new defense attorney, Jordan McAfee, a highly cynical guy who, at first, just assumes Jack is guilty. He sees him as good for business.
But he quickly realizes he's dealing with a very volatile client. A client defined by that same defiance we talked about.
Right. And that defiance, which literally saved Jack's life in the first prison, is now seriously undermining his defense in the second trial.
McAfee's first advice is simple. Stop playing the freedom fighter angle in jail.
He's begging him. Jack's refusal to wear the uniform, the multiple stints in solitary, the denial of basic comforts, all of this information feeds directly back to the prosecution. McAfee is desperate to present a sympathetic client, but Jack is just intent on preserving his psychological self, even at the expense of his legal strategy.
And McAfee tries to reason with him. He warns him that every action in jail will affect how the jury sees him.
But Jack just pushes back. He's insisting on his innocence, claiming he was wrongly accused the first time.
And McAfee's response is just the cold legal truth Jack hates to hear.
Yeah. McAfee says his job isn't to determine absolute guilt or innocence, it's just to mount the best defense possible. And Jack, who so desperately needs someone to believe his truth, is profoundly frustrated by this purely pragmatic legal approach.
Okay, this brings us to the core of the matter, the part that demands the most careful analysis. Part 4. Deconstructing the evidence and witness reliability. This is where the deep dive becomes truly forensic.
And the first, most debilitating element for the defense is that missing time. Jack cannot clearly remember those 90 minutes because of the alcohol and the violence of the beating. McAfee knows that if the prosecution can place Jack at the scene, the jury will just assume that the missing memory is an excuse for guilt.
So let's dive into the physical evidence, starting with the blood match. This is where Jack's trauma directly enables the false accusation.
Absolutely. Jack's blood was found on Gillian's shirt, item 200. The forensic expert, Frankie Martin, confirmed a match against Jack's known DNA sample, item 100, across all 7 tested markers.
I mean, that sounds damning on the surface. CSF1P0, TPOX, TX01, all those markers matched.
They all matched. It seems open and shut, but Jordan McAfee, the defense attorney, he immediately shifts the narrative. He moves from whose blood it is to how it got there.
Right. He uses the fact that the blood came from Jack's various injuries. The ones from the beating and the frantic run through the woods.
And he forces Frankie Martin to admit on the stand that she could not distinguish the source of the blood. She couldn't tell if it came from the scratch on his cheek, the cut above his eye, or his scraped palm.
And that small admission, it just opens the door for McAfee to propose alternative theories to the jury.
It's all he needs. He can now suggest that the blood was transferred during Jack's flight through the woods, Or hypothetically, during some innocuous contact, like a flirtatious exchange where Gillian, gently raked her hand down his arm, he subtly introduces the idea that this is transfer evidence, not violent struggle evidence.
So, next let's focus on the scratch itself. Gillian claimed it was from her fighting off a rape.
This is where McAfee really excels at turning expected evidence into reasonable doubt. He points out that the cut photographed on Jack's cheek is singular. It's a long, straight, thin cut.
Which is not what you'd expect.
Not at all. He argues to the jury that a girl fighting off a rapist would typically leave 4 or 5 parallel marks, the scars of several fingernails. A single straight cut is inconsistent with a violent defense.
But it is highly consistent with being whipped by a branch.
Or, as Jack later remembers, being grabbed and shoved by a single finger. It just doesn't fit her story.
Okay, now we have to tackle the most complex piece of evidence, the DNA mixture. The semen found on Gillian's inner thigh and the material under her fingernails. We need to explain this clearly.
Right. This is the centerpiece of the whole forensic breakdown. Both of those samples were DNA mixtures. The prosecution's expert, Martine, testified that Jack was 740,000 times more likely to be the donor than some random person.
A very high statistical probability.
Extremely high. However, she also repeatedly used the phrase imperfect fit.
And what does that imperfect fit actually mean in plain language?
It means the DNA profile wasn't clean. When they ran the test, the intensity of the alleles, the specific genetic markers they look for, was inconsistent. The numbers in parentheses on the DNA chart, like the 8 and 11 for TPOX, they just weren't showing up with the expected strength or ratio.
And there was something else, right? An extra allele.
Yes. Crucially, the test showed an extra lighter 7 allele at the TH01 system that could not be accounted for by the known DNA of either Jack or Gillian.
So an extra lighter 7 allele is basically forensic code for there is a ghost in the machine, there's DNA here that shouldn't be, or the sample is compromised.
Precisely. And Martine was forced to admit under cross-examination that this suggests one of 2 possibilities. Either there were 2 donors, Jack and a separate unknown man who contributed to the sperm sample.
Whoa.
Or the second donor could be a relative of Jack because, as she said, relatives have DNA profiles that overlap.
Which implies incest.
Yeah.
Or that someone related to Jack was involved. Both are drawers the prosecution definitely did not want opened.
Not at all. And McAfee capitalizes on this ambiguity perfectly by creating a phantom witness.
What do you mean?
He introduces the concept of a hypothetical blood sample. He assigns specific, plausible markers to this unknown hypothetical donor, and then he demonstrates to the jury how the combination of Gillian's DNA and this hypothetical profile, a profile that is not Jack's, could also account for the bizarre mixed results.
So he proves that Jack is not the only possibility.
Exactly. He successfully introduces the foundation for reasonable doubt by showing the imperfection of the science itself.
That is a masterful maneuver. It just completely destabilizes the prosecution's big statistical argument. And then the defense attacks Gillian's reliability directly with the hallucinogen plot.
Jordan's investigator, Selena Damascus, she finds that the thermos and cups recovered from Meg Saxton's room, which they used during the Beltane ritual, tested positive for atropine sulfate residue.
Which comes from the poisonous belladonna plant.
It does. And ironically, the source of the belladonna was traced back to Amos Duncan's own pharmaceutical plant.
Gillian's father.
Her father's plant. He was developing some new homeopathic line. So it provided a convenient, non-criminal source for the hallucinogen.
So what does a lab tech say about the effects of atropine sulfate? Why does this undermine Gillian's testimony so completely?
Well, the lab technician, Arthur Quince, confirmed that ingesting atropine causes confusion, agitation, and delirium. It's a hallucinogen.
So the defense can now argue that Gillian's memories of the assault weren't just false, but were chemically unreliable. Drug impaired.
That's the argument. She was celebrating a pagan festival, performing these rituals, potentially ingesting a hallucinogen, and then she runs into a drunk, terrified, bleeding man in the woods. Her whole account could easily be a delirium-fueled fantasy based on the reality of the community's fear of Jack.
And as these forensic walls start closing in, the girls' united front just collapses dramatically.
It really does. Meg, who is Detective Charlie Saxon's own daughter, she breaks first.
Her father confronts her about the thermos.
Gently, and she just dissolves and confesses. She admits that Gillian orchestrated the entire lie. She encouraged her friends to participate out of this toxic mix of fear of Jack and curiosity about whether they could actually pull off such a powerful manipulation.
And Meg's confession really gets to the root of the psychological manipulation Gillian performed on her own friends.
It does. Meg admits that the memories she used to justify her initial compliance memories of Jack maybe touching her, she says they weren't real. She had convinced herself Jack was dangerous based on the town's prejudice, and Gillian just provided the stage for that prejudice to become action.
And she explicitly says she thinks Gillian set it up to hurt Jack.
She does. A motive totally consistent with Gillian's earlier fascination with using the craft for malice.
And this realization absolutely terrifies Gillian. She recognizes the threat to her carefully constructed lie.
So when Meg confronts Gillian about the atropine, Gillian tries to downplay it. She calls it a pinch of stuff. But when Meg insists she's going to tell her policeman father about the lies and the drug use, Gillian physically attacks her, slaps her hard enough to leave a red mark.
And that violent, visceral reaction, it confirms for Charlie Saxton, and later helps the defense, that Gillian is capable of malice and manipulation.
Absolutely.
Now, we also have Addie's role here, which is this tremendous ethical and emotional conflict. Addie, a survivor of sexual assault herself, develops feelings for Jack. She hears all the warnings about his past, but ultimately, she commits perjury to save him.
Addie's decision is so complex. She sees Jack not as a monster the town labels him, but as this wounded soul who actually helped her move past her own trauma, the death of her daughter, Chloe, and the rape.
So when the prosecutor asks her directly if Jack was with her the whole night,
between 9:45 p.m. and 1:30 a.m., she takes this huge breath and just lies. Yes, he was with me that whole night.
That's an immense risk. The prosecutor, Matt Houlihan, is shocked. He immediately reminds her that perjury is a serious crime.
She knows the risk, but for her, it's a necessary act of, defiant redemption. She believes she's not just saving Jack, she's preventing the system from unjustly destroying an innocent man, which is something she failed to do when she was raped and her assailants went free. She sees herself saving him just as she felt he had saved her.
Okay, this takes us to the final tense moments in Part 5, the unveiling of truths and the verdict. The prosecution is reeling, but it's Addie's own investigation into Jack's first case that provides the greatest ammunition for the defense in the second.
It's incredible. Addie travels back to Loyal, New Hampshire. She's under the guise of enrolling her daughter at Westonbrook, hoping to find a concrete answer about Jack's initial guilt.
And she speaks with Detective Jay Kavanaugh, Jack's friend.
She does. And he mentions that Jack had a standing engagement at 7 every single night, the precise time Catherine Marsh claimed they were having their secret meetings.
And this is the absolute aha moment that reframes Jack's initial guilt entirely. It transforms the tragedy of that plea bargain into a likely miscarriage of justice.
It does. Addie is back in her motel room, and she hears the familiar, syncopated rhythm of the Jeopardy theme music.
And it all clicks into place.
Instantly, she remembers Jack's intense focus on the game, the same focus that saved his life in prison, and she realizes Jeopardy aired in Loyal, New Hampshire at 7 p.m.
So she knows, based on his obsessive nature, something she knows intimately.
A trait where he wouldn't even be distracted by her during the show.
He would never, under any circumstances, have missed that broadcast to meet Catherine Marsh.
Never. This small, mundane detail, a game show, becomes proof that Catherine Marsh must have lied about the timing of their relationship, probably to manipulate Jack into seeing her. It suggests that Jack's initial lawyer, Melton Sprigg, pressured him into pleading guilty to a relationship that might not have existed at all.
And that's what turned him into a registered offender for an entirely false accusation.
And this revelation, it solidifies Addie's willingness to commit perjury, and it gives Jordan McAfee the moral conviction he needs to press Jack harder on the stand.
Right, because Jack is still sticking to his story of not remembering, which is nearly fatal for his case. How does McAfee finally break through that trauma and intoxication barrier to get to the truth?
He uses a technique he calls the souvenir. He holds up this dried, shriveled posy that Jack had taken from Gillian in the men's bathroom earlier that night.
Just a small, seemingly insignificant detail.
But it acts as a physical anchor for Jack's fragmented memories.
And what truth finally emerges from Jack under that immense pressure?
He finally remembers. He admits that Gillian had found him in the woods. She came onto him insisting she had cast a spell to bring him there and that he was powerless to resist.
And Jack, drunk and terrified from the beating he just took,
he shoved her away violently, sprawled her on the ground, and then he ran away as fast as he could. He was running from her, not toward her.
And this explains everything consistently. The single scratch was from a shove or a grab, not self-defense. The blood was from the beating and the escape, not a sexual encounter. And his frantic flight was out of fear of being seen or accused again. It completely refutes the rape claim.
It does. And this admission comes at the very tail end of the trial, which just amplifies the drama. But the legal system had already provided the most stunning personal confession outside the courtroom, tying Addie's history of trauma directly to the legal figures involved.
Charlie Saxton, the detective lieutenant who photographed the evidence and reluctantly pursued Jack. He visits Addie at the diner late one night.
And he confesses. He admits he was one of the 3 high school athletes who gang raped her all those years ago under the bleachers. He says he knew what he was doing and just went along with it. It's a moment of profound psychological unpacking for both of them.
And Addie's response to this confession is arguably the most powerful insight in the entire narrative. It offers such a deep understanding of trauma and resilience.
She draws this fundamental distinction. She says, "You didn't ruin my life, Charlie. You raped me. There's a difference."
Wow.
She elaborates that the rape, which she says I couldn't keep from happening, that was a violation. But Charlie's subsequent actions, his choice to let prejudice fuel his work, to look the other way when other men harassed Jack, his choice to potentially ruin Jack's life, that was the controllable sin, the thing he could control.
She says the more you get past pain, the more it goes from coal to diamond. This elevates her response from simple forgiveness to this active, powerful acceptance of her own strength, totally independent of what he did to her.
It's an indictment of his failure of personal character and institutional choice, separate from the physical crime. His prejudice against Jack, the registered offender, was really just the result of his inability to face his own guilt.
So finally, we arrive at the verdict. Jordan McAfee has to tie all these threads together, the forensics, the psychology, the community prejudice, the occult backdrop, to establish reasonable doubt.
And his closing argument focuses entirely on credibility and the narrative of the occult. He stresses that Gillian lied about her true intentions in the woods. It wasn't just hanging out, it was a Beltane ritual. He highlights that the girls kept it hidden, that there were ribbons and candles, and that Chelsea Abrams wore the 5-pointed star, the pentagram necklace, symbolizing their pagan practice.
And in a conservative New Hampshire court, framing the accuser as a dark witch experimenting with hallucinogens is a devastating strategy.
It weaponizes community prejudice against the accuser, the very same prejudice the prosecution had leveraged against Jack. You combine that with the atropine, which causes confusion and delirium, and McAfee successfully argues that the prosecution's key witness was fundamentally unreliable, potentially hallucinating the entire assault, or at least creating a false narrative based on her belief in the power of malice.
The jury agrees Jack St. Bride is acquitted.
And the synthesis of learning here is just profound. The sources show how easily initial, legally coerced guilt Jack's plea bargain in Loyal validated the subsequent, entirely fabricated accusation in Salem Falls.
The moment he registered in town, the community didn't see a man fighting for his name.
They saw a repeat offender. His history created a legal blueprint for his destruction.
He became functionally guilty until proven innocent, which is the precise opposite of the legal standard we're supposed to rely on.
Exactly. And the most chilling insight, I think, is that the community's fear and the system's structure provided Gillian Duncan with the perfect vehicle for her malice. She didn't have to convince people Jack was a monster. His own past had already done that work for her.
And this leads us to our final provocative thought for you to consider as you wrap up this deep dive. The person who was Jack's most dangerous accuser in Salem Falls was not Gillian Duncan and her orchestrated lies.
No.
It was the memory of Catherine Marsh, amplified by his own original lawyer's disastrous advice to plead guilty the first time. The legal decision he made under duress years earlier acted as a permanent external validation of his subsequent false guilt. So what happens to justice when fear dictates the law and a person's prior coerced admission seals their fate forever?
It really forces you to question the entire mechanism of the plea bargain system, especially when you're confronting potential statutory or sexual offenses where the psychological pressure to just concede is often overwhelming.
A deeply complex and intricate analysis. Thank you for guiding us through this challenging source material.
My pleasure.
Until next time, stay well informed.